The coffee tasted like motor oil, but Roy Hendricks drank it anyway. His hands, permanently stained with grease despite countless scrubbings, wrapped around the cracked mug as he sat in the corner booth of Murphy's Diner. The same booth he occupied, every morning at 6, watching the sunrise through windows that hadn't been cleaned in years. The waitress, Betty, had stopped asking what he wanted weeks ago. Black coffee and 2 pieces of dry toast, same as always. Roy pushed 43 years old and felt twice that age. His left knee ached from an old shrapnel wound, and his right shoulder clicked whenever he reached overhead. 10 years out of the Space Marines, 5 years fixing broken shuttles at the port, and nothing to show for it except bills he couldn't pay and nightmares that wouldn't quit. The war had ended, but nobody told his brain that. The lawyer found him there, sliding into the opposite seat without invitation. Clean suit, smooth hands, the kind of man who never worked with tools. Roy looked up from his coffee and waited. "Roy Hendricks?" the man asked, pulling out a tablet. "I'm David Walsh from Walsh & Associates. I have some news about your uncle." "Don't have an uncle," Roy muttered, taking another sip of the terrible coffee. "Thomas Hendricks, your father's brother. He passed away 3 weeks ago on Luna." Roy set down his mug. His father had mentioned a brother once, maybe twice. Some family fight before Roy was born. Something about the old man thinking space was humanity's future while his brother preferred keeping his feet on solid ground. They hadn't spoken in decades. "What's that got to do with me?" Roy asked. Walsh tapped his tablet and turned it around. Legal documents filled the screen, lots of words Roy didn't understand. But at the bottom, clear as day, was his name. "He left you everything, his lunar facility, all equipment, and his personal effects. Crater 7 mining station, coordinates, attached." Walsh pulled out an old-fashioned paper envelope. "He also left this." Roy took the envelope with hands that only shook a little. His name was written across the front in shaky handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 3 lines. "Roy, the tools are still there, nephew. Fix what's broken. The access codes are in the legal papers. Tom." "This some kind of joke?" Roy asked. Walsh shook his head. "Mining rights expired years ago. Place has been listed as abandoned since 2387. But legally, it's yours now, along with about 8,000 credits in debt for unpaid maintenance fees." Roy laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "Course there is. Dead uncle I never met leaves me a pile of junk and a pile of bills." "There might be salvage value," Walsh offered. "Some of those old stations have rare metals in their construction. Could be worth the trip to check it out." After Walsh left, Roy sat alone with the papers. Crater 7 mining station. The name meant nothing to him, but the coordinates put it on Luna's far side, in the deep mountains where the big mining companies used to dig before they moved to the asteroids. Far from anywhere, forgotten by everyone. He looked at his bank account on his phone. Negative 400 credits. Rent was due in 2 days, and his landlord had already threatened eviction. The shuttle repair shop where he worked paid barely, enough to keep him in coffee and stale bread. This morning had started like every other morning for the past 5 years, going nowhere slowly. Maybe it was time to go nowhere quickly instead. The passenger transport to Luna cost everything Roy had and more. He sold his few possessions, borrowed against next month's pay, and sweet-talked the ticket agent into a payment plan that would probably ruin him. But 3 days later, he found himself pressed into an acceleration couch as the transport lifted, away from Earth. Space looked the same as it had during the war, black and endless, full of stars that didn't care about human problems. Roy closed his eyes and tried not to remember the last time he'd been up here, tried not to think about the friends who hadn't made it home. The transport's engines hummed steadily, carrying him toward whatever his uncle had left behind. Luna City was bigger than he remembered, sprawling across the crater floors in domes and tunnels. But Roy wasn't staying. He rented a small hopper, the kind of vehicle miners used to reach distant claims, and plugged in the coordinates from his uncle's papers. The rental agent looked at him strangely when she saw where he was going. "Nothing out that way," she said. "Been empty for years." "That's what they tell me," Roy replied. The hopper's cabin was cramped and smelled like recycled air. Roy strapped himself in and fired up the engines. Luna's surface fell away below him as he headed for the mountains, following the navigation computer toward coordinates he'd never heard of. The landscape rolled by underneath, gray and lifeless, marked only by the scars where machines had once torn wealth from the rock. 2 hours later, the computer chimed. Destination reached. Roy looked out the window and saw nothing but mountains and shadows. Then the radar picked up something metallic, tucked into a deep crater like a secret. He brought the hopper down carefully, landing on a flat pad that someone had carved from the rock years ago. Crater 7 mining station sat in the crater's shadow. Connected buildings and equipment sheds clustered around a central dome. It looked abandoned, but the landing pad was clear of dust and lights glowed in some of the windows. Roy suited up and cycled through the hopper's airlock, his boots crunching on the lunar surface as he approached what his uncle had left him. The main airlock responded to the codes from the legal papers. Roy stepped inside and felt artificial gravity take hold as the inner door cycled open. Air hissed around him as the station's atmosphere equalized with his suit. Clean air, breathable air, not the stale recycled stuff he'd expected from an abandoned facility. Something was wrong. The lights were on, the air was fresh, and he could hear the subtle hum of working machinery. This place wasn't abandoned at all. Roy unsealed his helmet and breathed station air for the first time. It tasted better than the coffee at Murphy's diner. Now he just had to figure out who else was living in his inheritance. The wrench in Roy's tool belt felt heavier than it should as he moved through the station's main corridor. Every instinct from his military days screamed at him to be ready for trouble, but his hands stayed steady as he examined the walls. Someone had been maintaining this place recently. The metal panels showed fresh repairs, and the air recycling units hummed with the efficiency of regular cleaning. His uncle's station was larger than it had looked from outside. The main corridor branched into workshops, living quarters, and what appeared to be a small hydroponics bay, growing actual vegetables under artificial lights. Roy paused at the growing beds, running his fingers through soil that smelled rich and earthy. Nobody abandoned a place and left the plants thriving. A soft sound made him freeze. Footsteps, but wrong somehow. Too light, moving in a rhythm that didn't match human walking. Roy's hand found the wrench without thinking, his body falling into the ready stance that had kept him alive through 3 tours of duty. But when he turned toward the sound, nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. The alien stood about, as tall as Roy's shoulder, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the station's lights. 4 arms moved independently as it adjusted something on a wall panel, and its head turned toward him with large, dark eyes that held intelligence and caution. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the alien spoke in accented but clear English. "You must be Thomas's nephew. I am Tesh. I have been waiting for you." Roy's grip on the wrench tightened. In the war, aliens had been targets or threats. The idea of one speaking to him calmly in his own language felt wrong on levels he couldn't name. "Waiting for me?" he asked. Tesh moved slowly, keeping all 4 hands visible. "Your uncle spoke of you often in his final days. He said someone would come who understood machines as he did. Someone who could help us finish what he started." "Us?" As if summoned by the word, more figures emerged from doorways along the corridor. Roy counted 12 of them, all roughly the same size and build as Tesh, all with that same pale blue skin and careful movements. They watched him with obvious nervousness, clustering together like prey animals ready to run. "We are Karathi," Tesh explained. "Refugees from a war you probably know nothing about. Your uncle gave us shelter when our ship was damaged. We have been here for 8 months. Roy looked from one alien face to another. "My uncle's been dead for 3 weeks." "Yes. We cared for him in his final illness. He made us promise to wait for you to explain what he had built here." Tesh gestured toward the workshops deeper in the station. "Will you listen?" Against his better judgment, Roy followed Tesh through the station. The aliens gave him space but stayed close enough to run if he proved dangerous. He recognized the body language from his own time in war zones. These weren't invaders or conquerors. They were scared people trying to survive. The main workshop took Roy's breath away. His uncle had built something incredible here, combining human engineering with technology Roy didn't recognize. Sleek alien components integrated seamlessly with familiar Earth-built systems, creating machines that looked like they belonged in a dream. Tools hung from magnetic strips, organized with the precision of someone who knew his trade. In the center of it all sat something that was clearly a spacecraft, though unlike any design Roy had seen. "Our ship," Tesh said, following his gaze, "or what remains of it. The damage from our escape was severe. Your uncle helped us patch it enough to fly, but the main drive systems still need work. He said you would understand what he could not." Roy approached the ship, his engineer's eye automatically cataloging the repairs. His uncle had done good work, but the job was only half finished. Jury-rigged human components held alien systems together, creating a hybrid that would need expert knowledge to complete. "Why trust humans at all?" Roy asked. "Most species we've met we ended up fighting." Tesh's large eyes grew sad. "Because the hegemony taught us what real enemies look like. The war that drove us here was not like your small conflicts. The hegemony destroys entire worlds, enslaves whole species. They glass planets from orbit for the crime of refusing to surrender. When we fled our homeworld, we carried everyone we could save, 12 survivors from a population of millions." Roy ran his hand along the ship's hull, feeling the smooth alien metal under his palm. "And you ended up here. Our navigation systems were damaged. We crashed on Luna's far side, near where your uncle was working alone. Any other human might have reported us to your authorities. But Thomas..." Tesh paused. Thomas had lost family to war himself. He understood running from something you cannot fight. The workshop fell silent except for the hum of machinery. Roy studied the ship's systems, noting where human and alien technology had been woven together. His uncle had been clever, using Earth-standard components to replace damaged alien parts. But the work needed someone who understood both systems, someone who could bridge the gap between human pragmatism and alien precision. "What's the plan if you get this thing running?" Roy asked. "Find other survivors," another Karathi said, speaking for the first time. "The hegemony scattered our people across the galaxy. Some may have found refuge on other worlds. We hope to gather them, perhaps find a place far from the war where we can rebuild." Roy nodded slowly. It was a good plan, assuming they could stay ahead of whatever had been chasing them. "This hegemony, they still looking for you?" Tesh's skin seemed to pale further. "Always. They do not forgive, and they do not forget. We hoped being so far from the main shipping lanes would keep us safe, but..." The alien gestured helplessly. "We cannot hide forever." Roy walked around the ship, examining the repair work from every angle. His uncle had been smart, creating a hybrid system that played to both species' strengths. Human reliability and alien efficiency, working together. It could work if someone finished what the old man had started. "These drive systems," Roy said, pointing to a complex assembly near the ship's rear. "I've never seen anything like them." "Karathi engineering is different from yours," Tesh explained. "We build for harmony between components rather than raw power. But your uncle's modifications use human approaches we never considered. The result is stronger than either system alone." Roy smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. He always was stubborn about doing things his own way. The aliens watched as Roy pulled tools from the workshop walls, examining each one carefully. His uncle had collected quite a selection over the years, mixing standard human equipment with alien tools he'd learned to use. Everything was clean and well-maintained, ready for someone who knew how to use them properly. "All right," Roy said finally. "I'll help you fix your ship, but I want to understand what I'm getting into first. Tell me about this war, about the hegemony, about what happens when they find people they're looking for." Tesh's expression grew grim. That, Roy Hendricks, will take some time to explain properly. 3 weeks into the repairs, Roy had fallen into a routine that reminded him why he'd become a mechanic in the first place. Every morning, he'd wake in the small quarters his uncle had used, drink coffee that actually tasted good, thanks to the Karathi water purification system, and head to the workshop where real problems waited for real solutions. The ship was beautiful in its complexity. Karathi engineering flowed like music, each component designed to work in harmony with every other part. Human additions looked crude by comparison, but they were solid, reliable, built to keep working when everything else failed. Roy found himself learning as much as he taught, discovering elegant solutions to problems he'd always solved with brute force. Tesh proved to be an excellent teacher and an even better student. The aliens' 4 arms made detailed work much easier, and their natural understanding of system harmonics complemented Roy's mechanical intuition perfectly. Other Karathi helped where they could, but most of them were farmers, artists, or teachers rather than engineers. They'd been ordinary people, living ordinary lives before the war came to their world. Roy learned their story over shared meals in the station's small common area. The Karathi had been a peaceful species, focused on growing things and making their world beautiful. They'd developed space travel more for exploration than conquest, spreading slowly through their local star cluster to establish gardens on suitable worlds. When the hegemony arrived demanding submission, most Karathi hadn't even understood what war meant. The destruction had been total and swift. Orbital bombardment reduced cities to ash, while hegemony ground forces hunted survivors through the ruins. Some Karathi ships had escaped the initial assault, carrying refugees to wherever they could find safety. Tesh's group had been running for 2 years before their damaged ship brought them to Luna. How many got away? Roy asked one evening as they worked late on the drive systems. We do not know, Tesh replied, their large hands delicately adjusting. A power coupling. Perhaps thousands, perhaps only hundreds. The hegemony controls communication networks in conquered systems. We have no way to contact other survivors. Roy tightened a connection and watched the diagnostic display shift from red to amber. Progress, but still not ready. What makes you think you can find them? Hope, Tesh said simply. And the belief that somewhere among the stars, others like us are working to build something better than what was destroyed. The work continued. Roy taught Tesh how human mechanical systems thought, all angles and forces and straightforward cause and effect. Tesh showed Roy how Karathi engineering flowed, energy and harmony in systems that adapted to changing conditions. Slowly, the ship's hybrid drive systems came together, creating something neither species could have built alone. Then the alarms started screaming. Roy's hands found his tools automatically as he looked up from the drive housing they'd been calibrating. Tesh had gone completely still, their pale skin somehow managing to become even paler. What is that? Roy demanded. Proximity alert, Tesh whispered. Ships approaching the station. They ran to the control room where other Karathi were already gathered around the sensor displays. Roy couldn't read the alien text, but the images were clear enough. 3 ships, sleek and predatory, dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the lunar system. Even at this distance, their design spoke of violence and conquest. Hegemony? Roy asked. Tesh nodded, their 4 hands moving across the controls with desperate speed. Hunter-killers. They found us. The lead Karathi at the sensor station spoke, rapidly in their own language. Tesh translated without looking away from the display. 18 hours until they reach us. Maybe 20 if they're being careful. Roy stared at the approaching ships and felt something cold settle in his stomach. During the war, he'd faced human enemies who wanted to capture territory or resources or strategic advantage. These ships were coming to finish a job that had started with the destruction of an entire world. There would be no negotiation, no surrender, no mercy. Options? He asked. Hide and hope they do not find us. One Karathi suggested. Run, if the ship can be made ready in time, said another. Fight, Roy said quietly. The control room went silent. 12 pairs of large alien eyes turned to stare at him. Fight? Tesh repeated. Roy, you do not understand. The hegemony fleet, that destroyed our homeworld numbered in the thousands. These are just the hunters they send to finish survivors. Yeah. Well, I've got some experience with hunters, Roy said. He was already thinking. his military training kicking in as he assessed their situation. This is a mining station. What kind of equipment does it have? Tesh looked confused by the change of subject. Standard extraction tools, plasma cutters, sonic fracturers, heavy lift systems. Why? Roy smiled, and for the first time since leaving Earth, it was the smile of a man who'd found work he understood, because miners and soldiers use a lot of the same tools. They just call them different names. He moved to the station schematics, highlighting sections with quick touches. Your uncle built this place smart. See these mining tunnels? Perfect. Firing positions with multiple fallback routes. These ore processing centers, bunkers if you know how to use them, and these plasma cutters. He pulled up the equipment specifications. Industrial mining laser, pointed at a ship instead of a rock and you've got yourself a weapon. The Karathi stared at him with mixtures of hope and horror. You want to turn our sanctuary into a battlefield, Tesh said. I want to turn it into a fortress, Roy corrected. There's a difference. A battlefield is where people die randomly. A fortress is where people die according to plan. He turned back to the approaching ships on the display. 18 hours to prepare for a fight he'd never expected to have again, against enemies he'd never imagined facing. But the cold fear in his stomach was warming into something else now. Something familiar and fierce and almost welcome after years of fixing broken shuttles for ungrateful customers. I'm going to need a complete inventory of everything on this station, Roy said. Every tool, every system, every piece of equipment your uncle left behind, and I need to know exactly what those ships can do. Tesh hesitated. Roy, we are not warriors. We are farmers and teachers and artists. We do not know how to fight. That's okay, Roy said, watching the hunter-killers creep closer on the display. I do. The next 18 hours would either save them all or see them die together. But for the first time since inheriting a mystery from a dead uncle, Roy Hendricks knew exactly what he was supposed to be doing. Time to find out what his uncle had really left him. Roy moved through the mining station like a man possessed, seeing weapons where others saw tools and fortress walls where others saw simple corridors. The Karathi followed him nervously as he cataloged their resources, his military mind automatically, transforming their peaceful sanctuary into something that could bite back. These sonic fracturers, he said, running his hands over a piece of mining equipment the size of a small car. What's their effective range? 2 kilometers for precision work, Tesh replied. Perhaps 5 for general excavation. But Roy, they are meant for breaking rock, not ships, Roy finished. I know, but metal's just another kind of rock. If you hit it right. He made notes on his tablet, cross-referencing power requirements and targeting systems. What about these ore separators? Electromagnetic field generators. They sort different metals from raw ore by manipulating their magnetic properties. Roy grinned. Perfect. Ever wonder what happens to a ship's electronics when you hit them with a focused electromagnetic pulse? The next few hours revealed the full scope of what his uncle had built. Crater 7 wasn't just a mining station. It was an engineer's paradise, equipped with every tool needed to carve wealth from solid rock or to maintain complex systems in the harsh environment of space. More importantly, it was built into the crater walls themselves, tunnels and chambers extending deep into the lunar bedrock like the roots of some massive mechanical tree. Your uncle was paranoid, Roy observed as he explored yet another hidden passage. These aren't just maintenance tunnels. They're escape routes, supply lines, defensive positions. He built this place to survive anything. Thomas spoke often of preparing for hard times, Tesh admitted. He said space was dangerous for those who were not ready. Roy nodded, understanding. His uncle better with each discovery. The old man had been a veteran too, probably from the same wars that had left Roy with nightmares and scarred hands. He'd built Crater 7 not just as a mining station but as a refuge, a place where someone could make a stand if the universe decided to come calling with violence. The plasma cutters were the key to everything. 6 industrial-grade mining lasers, each one capable of slicing through solid rock like butter. Roy spent hours studying their specifications, learning how to modify their targeting systems and boost their power output. The Karathi watched in fascination as he rewired control systems and rerouted power conduits, turning tools of creation into instruments of destruction. "This feels wrong," one of the Karathi said as Roy completed the modifications to the first plasma cutter. "We came here to escape war, not to bring it with us." "War found you anyway," Roy replied without looking up from his work. "The question now is whether you meet it on your feet or on your knees." The electromagnetic pulse generators required more creativity. Roy positioned them at key points throughout the station, creating overlapping fields that would disrupt any electronic systems in their range. The sonic fracturers went into the deepest tunnels, their massive forms aimed upward through carefully calculated angles that would focus their destructive harmonics on ships passing overhead. But weapons were only part of the equation. Roy spent precious hours studying the approaching hegemony ships, learning their specifications from the Karathi databases. Hunter-killers were fast and deadly, built for pursuing fleeing refugees rather than engaging hardened targets. Their shields were designed to deflect desperate shots from damaged civilian vessels, not focused industrial-grade weaponry. "They'll come in fast and low," Roy explained as he briefed the Karathi on his defensive plan. "Banking on speed and surprise to overwhelm any resistance. They're expecting to find frightened refugees hiding in the dark, not a prepared defensive position." Tesh studied the tactical display Roy had created, showing firing lanes and fallback positions throughout the station. "You have turned our home into a maze of death." "I've given you a chance to survive," Roy corrected. "The rest is up to us." The Karathi proved to be quick learners when their lives depended on it. Roy showed them how to operate the modified mining equipment, how to coordinate their fire for maximum effect, how to move through the tunnels without exposing themselves to enemy targeting. They were naturally graceful and precise, qualities that translated well to the careful work of defensive combat. "Remember," Roy said as they practiced emergency procedures for the dozenth time, "you're not trying to be heroes. You're trying to stay alive long enough for the plan to work. Follow the routes I've shown you, trust your equipment, and don't take unnecessary risks." With 6 hours remaining until the hegemony ships arrived, Roy made his final preparations. Emergency supplies went into each defensive position, along with backup power cells and spare parts for the weapons. Communication lines were tested and retested, ensuring that every defender could coordinate with every other regardless of where the battle took them. The ship's repairs would have to wait. Roy sealed the workshop and activated the station's emergency protocols, powering down all non-essential systems and routing everything to weapons and shields. Crater 7 disappeared from passive sensors, becoming just another dead piece of rock in the lunar landscape. "What if your plan fails?" Tesh asked as they made their way to the command center for the final countdown. "Then we die fighting instead of running," Roy said. "Some days that's the best you can hope for." But privately he felt more alive than he had in years. The nightmares and flashbacks that had plagued him since the war seemed distant now, replaced by the clear focus that came with purposeful action. This was what he'd been trained for, what all those years of combat and preparation had been leading toward. Not glory or conquest, but the simple act of standing between innocent people and those who would destroy them. The hegemony ships appeared on the sensors exactly on schedule, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Roy watched them approach and felt the familiar calm that came before violence the moment when all planning ended and execution began. "Positions," he ordered, and throughout the station, 12 Karathi refugees moved to their assigned posts. None of them were soldiers, but all of them understood what would happen if they failed. The hegemony had already destroyed their world once. They would not be allowed to do it again. Roy settled into the command center's targeting controls, his hands finding the weapon's interface with practiced ease. Outside, the hunter-killers began their final approach, confident in their superiority and certain of their victory. They were about to learn that humans didn't surrender easily, and that sometimes the best mechanic was one who knew how to break things as well as fix them. The battle for Crater 7 was about to begin. The first hegemony ship died before it realized Crater 7 was anything more than empty rock. Roy waited until the sleek hunter-killer passed directly over the main plasma cutter installation, then triggered every industrial laser simultaneously. 6 beams of focused energy punched through the ship's shields like they were made of paper, carving through armor plating and vital systems with surgical precision. The explosion lit up the crater floor, debris raining down on the lunar surface. As the remaining 2 ships peeled away in shock and confusion, Roy allowed himself exactly 3 seconds of satisfaction before switching to the next phase of his defense plan. "First blood to us," he announced over the communication system. "Stay sharp, people. They know we're here now." The surviving hegemony. Ships regrouped quickly, their commanders adapting to the unexpected resistance with professional efficiency. They began a careful orbital bombardment, probing for weak points in the station's defenses while staying clear of the plasma cutter firing lanes. Energy blasts hammered the crater walls, sending shockwaves through the tunnels and chambers, where the Karathi waited with their improvised weapons. Roy watched the attack pattern develop and smiled grimly. The enemy ships were being cautious now, treating Crater 7 like a real military target instead of a refugee camp. That caution would cost them. "Tesh, activate electromagnetic pulse generators on my mark," he ordered. "All other positions prepare for close engagement." The second ship came in low and fast, skimming the crater rim while its weapons blazed. Roy let it commit to its attack run before triggering the electromagnetic pulse generators. Invisible, energy washed over the hunter-killer, and its smooth flight became a tumbling fall as electrical systems failed throughout the vessel. It hit the crater wall with tremendous force, carving a deep gouge in the rock before coming to rest in a tangle of twisted metal. But the third ship had learned from its companion's mistakes. It stayed high and cautious, using long-range weapons to systematically destroy the plasma cutter positions while remaining outside their effective range. One by one, Roy's primary weapons fell silent under the sustained bombardment. Falling back to secondary positions, Roy announced, but he could hear the strain in his own voice. The plan was working, but barely. They'd hurt the enemy, but not enough to drive them off entirely. The final hegemony ship began its killing run, confident now that the station's main defenses were neutralized. It swept over the crater floor, weapons charging for the killing blow that would finish what had started with the destruction of the Karathi homeworld. Roy made his decision in that moment, the desperate gambit he'd been hoping to avoid. "Tesh, emergency power to the ship's drive systems. Everyone else, evacuate to the deepest tunnels and seal the blast doors." "Roy, what are you doing?" Tesh's voice crackled over the communication system. "Something stupid," Roy replied, running through the station corridors toward the workshop where the half-repaired Karathi ship waited. "Get clear and stay clear. This is going to get messy." The ship's systems came online reluctantly, hybrid, human and Karathi technology, struggling to coordinate under emergency power. Roy strapped himself into the pilot's seat and felt the unfamiliar controls respond to his touch. The vessel wasn't ready for spaceflight, but it didn't need to fly. It just needed to move. Outside, the hegemony ship had begun its final approach, weapons building to full power, as it prepared to reduce Crater 7 to radioactive dust. Roy fired the Karathi ship's engines at maximum thrust, launching himself upward through the crater's atmosphere shield in a trajectory that would intercept the enemy vessel at the worst possible moment. The hunter-killer's commander had perhaps 5 seconds to realize what was happening before Roy's ship struck them amidships at several thousand meters per second. The impact was catastrophic, tearing both vessels apart in a brief star that outshone Luna's distant sun. Debris scattered across the crater floor, metal rain falling on stone that had witnessed the death of armies. Roy woke up 3 days later, in the station's small medical bay, his body wrapped in bandages and his head feeling like someone had used it for percussion practice. Tesh sat nearby, their large eyes watching him with obvious relief. "The escape pod systems worked," Tesh explained. "Your uncle built them well. You ejected just before impact." Roy tried to sit up and immediately thought better of it. "The hegemony ships?" "Destroyed. All 3. The debris field will serve as warning to others who might come looking for us." Over the following weeks, as Roy recovered from his injuries and the Karathi worked to repair the battle damage, the full scope of what they'd accomplished became clear. Word spread through hidden networks and refugee communities scattered across the galaxy. Crater 7 had become something unprecedented, a place where refugees could fight back and win. The first ship arrived 2 months after the battle, carrying a dozen survivors from another destroyed world. Then came others, different species fleeing different wars but all seeking the same thing, a place to make a stand. Roy found himself reluctantly thrust into the role of coordinator and defender, the human who'd proven that running wasn't the only option. "We're not a military base," he explained to each new group of arrivals. "We're a sanctuary that happens to have teeth. You work, you contribute, you help defend what we're building here. In exchange, you get a chance to start over." The station, expanded new tunnels and chambers carved from the lunar bedrock to house the growing population. Workshops sprang up around equipment donated by grateful refugees, creating a strange but vibrant community where a dozen different species worked side by side. The Karathi taught agriculture in the expanded hydroponics bays, while others shared their own knowledge of medicine, art, and engineering. Roy established training programs for the new arrivals, teaching them the same lessons he'd learned during his years of war and peace: how to turn mining equipment into weapons, how to coordinate defensive positions, how to fight as a community rather than as individuals. But more importantly, he taught them how to build something worth defending. "This isn't what I expected when I came here," he admitted to Tesh one evening, as they watched sunset through the crater's observation deck. Below them, dozens of different beings worked together on projects that would have been impossible for any single species. "What did you expect?" Tesh asked. Roy considered the question as he watched a group of young beings from 3 different species playing together in the station's common area. "Scrap metal I could sell to pay off my debts, maybe enough to buy a ticket back to Earth and a bottle of something strong enough to help me forget. And now? Now I remember why I learned to fix things in the first place." Roy smiled, feeling something settle into place that had been broken for longer than he cared to admit. Because everything worthwhile breaks eventually, and somebody has to care enough to put it back together. The communication array chimed softly, indicating another incoming refugee ship requesting sanctuary. Roy stood and stretched, working out the kinks that reminded him daily of his collision with the hegemony hunter-killer. "Another group looking for safe harbor," he said. "Species I've never heard of. Fleeing a war I don't understand. But they'll work, they'll contribute, and they'll help us build something better than what they left behind." Tesh rose gracefully, their forearms moving in the gesture their people used to express contentment. "Your uncle would be proud of what you've built here." "We've built," Roy corrected. "This place belongs to everyone who's willing to defend it." As they walked back toward the station proper, Roy reflected on the strange path that had brought him to Luna's far side. He'd come looking for an inheritance and found a purpose. He'd expected to find scrap metal and discovered a community. Most importantly, he'd thought he was broken beyond repair and learned that sometimes the best way to fix yourself is to help fix others. The refugee ship was already visible on the long-range sensors, limping toward Crater 7 on damaged engines and empty fuel tanks. Another group of survivors, another chance to prove that running wasn't the only response to overwhelming force. Roy quickened his pace toward the communication center, already planning where they could house the new arrivals and what skills they might bring to the growing community. Outside the observation windows, Luna's ancient surface stretched away, toward distant Earth, marked now by the debris fields of 3 hegemony ships that had learned too late what happened when humans decided to make a stand. The craters and mountains looked the same as they had for millions of years, but something fundamental had changed in this small corner of the solar system. Crater 7 had become more than a mining station or a refugee camp. It had become proof that the galaxies displaced and dispossessed could fight back and win, that sanctuary didn't require surrender, and that sometimes the most important inheritance wasn't property or money, but the knowledge of how to build something worth defending. Roy Hendricks, veteran mechanic and reluctant guardian, had finally found work that mattered. The tools were still there, just as his uncle had promised, and there was plenty left to fix.